that's when that data gets updated by the state, and we say, okay, now what are we going to do next week with regards to, are we changing anything? Are we modifying anything? Now, I think Matt's correct. At any point, the state as a whole could change, and we could be under completely different requirements as we were in March. That's a possibility at any point. The March was a mandate in March. We didn't have any choice in March. We had everybody shut down. And I'm hoping we don't get to that point. I don't anticipate we will, but I didn't predict that in March either. So I think maintaining the metrics and following the data is where we're pretty much set to go.
The only thing I'll add real quickly, and Dr. Schuessler, I don't know if you want to jump in on that. I know since you're not on the board, you might not have a ton of insight there. But so for our staff, I think I will tip my hat to Mr. Turner on this. He has advocated very strongly for the staff and for the administration within our schools. So if I think about your question, Allie, from a teacher's perspective, their week is going to look totally different if on a Friday morning they're expecting to go in 4 days a week to have in-person class, and then they have to do something different. So I know that Mr. Turner will be very sensitive to that. It would be our goal and everyone's goal to get in a model and be in it for a long time. Unfortunately, the scenario we're in is there's parameters we need to keep a tab on that we can't control, right? So we do have to be vigilant. So I talked earlier on, there's the COVID safety side of this, and then there's the how do we educate our students and how do we care for our students as effectively as we can. And so each of these are very dynamic and fluid. I hope we're helping you understand the situation, and we can't predict the future. But the goal would be to stay in a model for as long as we can. And the only thing that would take us out of the 4-day hybrid is if our numbers spiked, frankly, or if we found that we can't do a good job within our buildings with our protocols. And as I mentioned earlier, we've had enough kind of test cases, and we've had several weeks of kids in the building where we do feel good about our protocols. But that's just a flavor of what we have to balance and what Mr. Turner has to balance. And so the last thing I'll say on that is we talked about the updates to the state dashboard on a weekly basis on Thursdays. We're watching data every single day. It just gets updated at a state perspective on Thursday. So there's a constant monitoring at different levels of all this data.
All right, thank you all.
And I'm not on the board yet, guys. Yeah, I'm not on the board yet, so I'm not really privy to the decision making. But I watch some of the similar dashboards that the board does, just because my own profession was shut down back in March as well as part of the same mandate. And we have policy and protocol that can change literally every 15 minutes, depending on what the CDC decides to do. So, I watch the same dashboards just because we have to follow policy and protocol as well. So, that's one thing I'm looking forward to with the board is just learning a lot more about how these decisions are made with respect to the schools.
All right, sorry for interrupting you there, but thank you all for that response. I think it is important that we keep that responsiveness in mind, and the idea that we would like to stay in a model as much as possible, I think is something we can all agree with. And Kate Grayson, you had a question, so if you would like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Hi, I'm Kate Grayson. I'm a senior at Ryle High School, and my question kind of touches back on what's something that y'all were talking about a little bit a few minutes ago. But as we go to a 4-day hybrid, assuming that decision stays, what new systems are you encouraging schools to implement to encourage social distancing, even if it's kind of impossible to do? Like at Ryle, there's almost 2,000 students, obviously not all in person, but mostly in person. And some of my classes already, even at half capacity, are not social distance. And I personally have already had a COVID scare at school, and I'm concerned that there could be more close encounters. So what are you suggesting that schools do to further ensure the safety of their students given limited PPE and increased classroom sizes?
I can start with that, and I'll say we essentially just have to follow the CDC guidelines, which say social distance or physical distance when possible, and if not, you do the best you can. I know, with my labs are still face to face. I see my students face to face. We all mask. We try our hardest to stay away from each other. We follow normal health protocol, wash our hands. Now we're lucky we wear goggles and lab coats and all that stuff. But and I'm in your same shoes. I've had students test positive a day after my lab, and we do the best we can. We just follow the protocols, stick to the protocols, and then if at some point data shows us we need to change something, I mean, we're following what the CDC and the Northern Kentucky Health Department have recommended. So I think, you're right. You're in a situation where there are people that are going to be within 6 feet of one another. We need to follow masking. We need to do the best we can. And that's, for the foreseeable future, that will be a concern, right? So we have to deal with that the best that we can. It's balancing that safety with the needs of students, right? So,
Kate, I can tell you, because I'm pretty familiar with getting exposed and the masking and the PPE and protocols, because I'm face to face with everybody. I wear a mask, my assistant wears a mask, but my patient doesn't wear a mask, and I am 6 inches from their face. What we follow is we do the same protocol. We're diligent about our masks. We wear eye protection, and we physically distance my staff physically distances from each other as much as possible when we're not with patients, but you have to trust wearing your mask. I think the tricky part is getting everybody to do it correctly. Wearing your mask and wearing it correctly is super important. And if there's a need for someone to come in and actually show people the right way, if there is a problem with access to proper PPE or somebody needs something, I think it's important to reach out to the teachers or have them reach out to the parents or the community to see what we can do to help you obtain what you need. Because I know most of the families or most of the community members are more than willing to step up and help, even if it's providing fabric masks or boxes of surgical masks, whatever are needed, if you guys feel like you don't have what you need to try to keep yourself safe. The most important thing is, if one of your friends is positive, as long as everybody around you is wearing their mask properly, proper cough hygiene, hand hygiene, chances are your risk of catching is going to be pretty low. But you have to follow all of the hygiene rules, and you just have to be really diligent.
Yeah, Kate, great question. I mean, you're hitting at the heart of this balance that we have to try to strike of safety around COVID and also meeting the needs of our students. I think both Dr. Brown, Dr. Schuchler had great insights. What I would add is, so at Ryle, 2,000 students. So, we are going to be limiting the capacity just through the hybrid option to begin with. So, I think it's going to be roughly 1,500 students there, maybe 1,600. I don't know exactly, but it's a decent delta from the max. But absolutely, there's going to be rooms. Dr. Brown and I were there about 10 days ago that you're going to be closer than 6 feet. So you asked what we would encourage. I mean, certainly strict adherence to protocols, awareness within the students as well as the staff and faculty on just, we can't let our guard down in that regard. You might have situations where we have to use plexiglass shields or a teacher or a set of students want to use something like that. Dr. Brown spoke about her labs. We were in an elementary school where in their science classroom, they're going to literally have kids facing each other if they go back to their normal setup. So the best solution there is using plexiglass shields and masks, of course. I think it's also important to note that, and Dr. Brown shared an article. I think it was you, Dr. Brown. It might have been Julie, but someone on the board shared an article today that increasingly we're finding, or researchers are finding, that the spread within schools is quite limited. We've seen it just in some of the regional studies we've done, or not studies, research, I would say we've done, just looking at dashboards from other districts that have been in Kentucky, you have to report your COVID cases, right? Now, those are cumulative reports, but in Indiana, they're doing the same thing, and they're showing you weekly what their COVID cases look like, what their quarantines from each COVID case looks like. And you can see when they started school, they might have had they were at a certain level, and then 4, 5, 6 weeks in, it drops quite a bit. To me, that's an interesting data point that protocols are working in the schools. Some people would even argue that schools are helping control spread. I think that's a conclusion you can make, but it's just a single data point. So again, it does come back to the protocols. It comes back to, as Dr. Brown said, what CDC says is 6 feet when you can, and then do the best you can. But we don't want to be cavalier in that either. So some creativity is obviously the shields in the rooms, or finding other spaces, whether that's a gymnasium or a wing of a cafeteria. I don't have all those answers because I'm not in the building every day. But walking the buildings with some of these principals, I know they are being as creative as possible to create the extra space. And it's not going to be easy for them at all. So that's part of the balance that we recognize. Nothing about this is going to be easy. And frankly, probably what we're doing right now is the hardest, the hybrid, for students and for teachers. So hopefully that helped.
I'll also point out, and I had a high school student who actually brought this to me. He said, "You're not protecting me from anything that I'm not exposed to every day." This particular high school student said, "I work at Kroger. I see unmasked people in my line for 7 hours a day. I'm exposed." And I know Matt mentioned one day he was at, I think it was a Panera or a Starbucks, and school was on a hybrid day and kids were virtual. There was a table of, I think he said 6 or 8 kids together, unmasked, far closer than 6 feet. I think it's a calculated risk that most of our athletes have taken, most of our students who have jobs have taken, our students who are doing college tours are taking. There's a point at which it's a risk benefit ratio. And I know, most of you probably have jobs, you probably have experiences outside of your home. So unless you're sitting in your home by yourself all the time, which, perhaps you are, then you would probably select the virtual model, I would assume. But there are risks every time that we are interacting with any other human being. So I think I'll point out that most of what we've seen is spread outside. I know if you listen to the governor's discussion every day right now, the biggest concern they're seeing with contact tracing are weddings, funerals, small family gatherings. I know I had a friend this weekend that a group of high school students recreated their homecoming, 30 high school students dressed up together. So I think that is probably right now where we're seeing the vast majority of our spread. So I'm hopeful that our protocols will continue to be stringent and that we can maintain safety as much as we can and reduce that risk in the school setting.
Would you consider doing randomized testing among students and teachers?
We looked at doing that, and we actually talked to some of the parents. I think the concern there is currently the RT-PCR test is considered the gold standard, right? That is a snapshot. So in order to actually track your current exposure, that is a snapshot, that's a window. How frequently do you take a picture to ensure you're capturing the whole thing, right? So some of the guidance say you really need to test every student. So look at, for example, where I teach, their high school program, their football program. They're tested twice a week right now, every single football player. 20,000 or 21,000 students, or however many, if 80% are in person, should really be tested multiple times a week if that's the protocol that you're using. Currently, the CDC does not recommend that, in part because of the false negatives and false positives, and the fact that it is a snapshot. Kate, I could check you on Wednesday, and your viral load is so low that you don't come up positive after 40 cycles. You don't fluoresce, you don't go. And then Thursday morning, you hit threshold, and maybe you are infectious. I won't know that I won't know that until I test you again. You could be asymptomatic. So I think the question is, where are we best putting our resources? Random testing. We have many families that said, nope. Mm-mm. So when you allow for an opt-out model, you're concerned that the population from which that you're pulling is not representative of your population. So there's a question of what does that data actually tell you? So that's a concern. I know UK is doing some of that testing now, and they've backed off quite a bit from some of that testing. So,
And I'll add that even being in the risk that I'm at with my profession, we aren't testing our patients or requiring that they test before they come in. We are trusting that what we're doing is keeping us safe while we're working.
Thank you.
I hate to pass on a question. They did a great job. I mean, I think for me, it comes down to, and we did look at it. Mr. Turner has researched that quite a bit along with other districts. I think the crux of it for me comes down to what Dr. Brown says. I mean, you have to, as a public school district, offer an opt-out. So how valuable is that data, especially when you layer in the false positives and different things like that? Guidance from CDC doesn't recommend the asymptomatic. Now that has moved around some, but the docs I talk to definitely don't recommend the asymptomatic testing. So I think it's definitely worth being a part of the equation of discussion, but for right now, I don't see the upside, and it's very, very costly. It was going to be to follow a certain protocol that would have been considered, you know, the gold standard. If we were to go down that path, it was going to be $2 million. So that's a lot of money that could be probably invested somewhere else.
So thank you all for your responses to that. And thank you, Kate, for bringing up both those questions. They were incredible. And thank you for your responses. Allison Gale, you had a follow-up question.
Yeah, thank you. So my question is, what is the threshold as far as COVID numbers for a full return? And if our numbers increase above this threshold after the full return, do we go back to hybrid, or will everyone be virtual from that point?
I guess my question to you is what do you count as a full return? Do you mean 100% of students back into the classroom with no masking and no protocols? Do you mean, I guess if you could clarify who you mean.
Like the 4-day school week that they were talking about with like, I think it was the Wednesday we don't have, but then it's full in person for Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday.
So the CDC doesn't recommend, they compare it to goalposts, right? They say it's a wide range, right? You're looking at multiple factors. So when we sit down and talk to the health department and we look at ICU capacity, so the CDC actually has kind of almost like an algorithm, right? So you go through what they call their primary indicators, and those are case rates per 100,000 in a population, right? So in Boone County, we're approximately 130,000 people. You look at positivity rates in the county. That data is sometimes hard to get a hold of, but we know the Kentucky positivity rates, and that currently is PCR tests over total tests that are positive over total. We also have to look at things like what's the burden with regards to positives in our schools? What's the burden with regards to quarantines in our schools, ICU capacities, trends? So if you follow the CDC guidance, it essentially has you allocate each of those metrics in a red. I think they have red, yellow, green, salmon. Like, you know, it's a multi-tiered system, and then you have to look at your risk assessment, and that's what we do in relation with our district administrators, our local health department, and they help us guide that. So I hear what you're saying. I know everybody's looking for a number so that they can predict. The trick is it can't just be one number. It has to look at all of those factors. They all play a role in that decision.
Yeah, I'll just add, thanks, Dr. Brown, on that. So the document that she's referencing that we are using is called the CDC Indicators and Thresholds for Risk of Introduction and Transmission of COVID-19 in Schools. So, I mean, she did a great job. I'm going to be terribly redundant if I spend a lot of time on this, but it is a range when you talk about cases per 100,000. So to put a number on that is just not a fair way to assess our situation. And then, so if you look at that document, or if you go pull it up, you have core indicators, which are cases by 100,000, positivity rate, and then how well can you adhere to the standard protocols that are given: masking, distancing, sanitary, washing your hands, all that fun stuff. So those are your primary indicators. And then you have several secondary indicators, looking at trends of the data and different things like that. So it's looking at each of these components in context and within our community. So there's not going to ever be if we get to 15, we can't go back. It's going to be, well, here's where we are, and how does that look in comparison to 2 or 3 other parameters? Actually, probably more like 6 or 7 other parameters, with the primary and the secondary parameters.
All right, thank you both for your responses on that and explaining what that may look like.
Hey, Connor.
Viviana, yeah.
Real quick, I think somebody should ask Dr. Schuessler's kids a question. They're there in the car with her. I'm just kidding. I don't want to take y'all off track.
All right, so with that, I'm going to call on Viviana. I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher this name. Heredia. And if you could just introduce yourself and ask your question, that'd be great. And then for our panelists and our askers, we ask that you keep it a little bit short. We are starting to run close on our time, and we'd like to get through as many questions as possible.
Hi, my name is Viviana Heredia, and I'm a senior at Ryle High School. And I'm kind of backtracking on something we started talking about towards the beginning of the meeting. But considering that mental health and overall motivation is a major concern among students countywide, especially during this time, has there been any recent programs or maybe like protocols created or recommended by the board which could possibly balance safety and mental health without putting our students at risk at the hands of more in-person learning? And by this, I mean maybe a program, not something that we've used in the past, but specific to this time within COVID-19 and NTI and stuff like that. If there's been anything created to sort of help that problem.
So I'll jump in. So any recent programs implemented to reduce the risk of additional in-person instruction? I mean, I think the first obvious one is providing that virtual option. So we've never had a virtual and in-person option. So I think that's number one. I think continuing to encourage the extracurricular engagement is another. I think our district already does a really good job with the mental health. We have a lot of social emotional learning programs throughout our elementary, our middle, and our high schools. Our student services organization is very active here regionally and across the state in kind of best practices around mental health. We have a lot of really good partnerships in the community with organizations that are focused on mental health. So those can be, some of them are what I would call formalized, where we're doing referrals medically to those. Others are maybe more informal, where it's, you could go here for this kind of help or there for that kind of help. The challenge with all this, frankly, is if the kids aren't, so many of our kids, especially the kids that are at risk, that aren't engaged from a virtual perspective, how do you, number one, know to assess that they have an issue that they need help with? How do you communicate to them what their options are? So again, I mean, you're asking a great question, but we're back to that balance of, if a student is sitting at home and won't turn on their camera and maybe won't even engage with you, how do we know there's an issue to even engage whatever programs we have in place? So it becomes very difficult. I'm getting wordy, so I know Connor wants us to move quicker, so I'll stop there.
And I'll just say that, making sure that we're using available options. I know many of the therapies that we have do have telehealth options available. which is better intervention than nothing. So I think we engage, gosh, we go through the contracts when we have to approve them. It's at least 20 different outside agencies or inside of our schools trying to provide services when needed. I think we're finding that there is a huge need for services right now. And I think we just have to do our best to address those and then engage students. And that's, if I knew of a magical way to engage students, I would have 75 published articles and 3 books and I would be a billionaire. So there's that.
One thing I'll add real quick, the question was about students, but staff is really important, obviously. The board did approve an emergency approval back middle of the summer, an EAP program, so an employee assistance program that we haven't had as part of our benefits offerings. So that was put in place here over the summer leading into the school year. So a way for individuals to get counseling and extra help that they might need. It's a benefit that's no cost to the employee. So that was something that, Mr. Turner and his leadership brought to the board that we quickly approved.
Dr. Brewer, would you like anything to add to that?
I think she's.
I don't have a whole lot to add with respect to that. Again, my issue with engagement is with the little kids. And I know we have counseling services available at North Point, and I'm a very actively involved parent. I think the trouble is when we have families that maybe their parents aren't as actively engaged. So I know that if I start seeing problems with my kids, I know that I can go to the counseling services at North Point and get an appointment with one of our counselors there, either starting with the guidance counselor or through North Key or something like that. But I know other people may be reluctant to use the resources, or they're simply not recognizing that there's an issue. I don't have a good answer to tell you how to fix that, other than just to keep letting people know that there is help available struggling, and you don't have to be in person to utilize it.
All right, thank you all for that. And Kate, you had a question.
Hi. So up until this point, it seems that student input has not really been considered. I don't know if that's just, it's not been widespread or if I haven't heard about it, but going into the future past this town hall, will you be taking student input into more consideration, especially with the older kids? And if so, what will that look like? And is it like a survey that will go out, or like just kind of like a question box or concern box that students are allowed to contribute to so that we feel like we can have a say?
Well, actually, we actually do have quite a bit of student input. We have a student representative on our school board. So Tony Clevenger is currently our student representative, and she leads the work of our student advisory council, and that includes a superintendent's advisory council. So we have students from elementary, middle, and high school who can provide input. I know we spoke last board meeting with some of the head of our learning and support services who are looking at doing surveys for our virtual learners and for students on our hybrid model. I think the problem therein lies, and this has been my experience as a teacher, I get responses from the engaged students and not necessarily from the students who aren't engaged. So often those answers may not give me the information that I'm actually looking for. So I think to avoid survey fatigue is important, but then asking for the opinion. And I guess it depends on what you mean with regard to feedback. If the feedback is no homework and I don't want to have any standards, that's probably not going to happen. We're here to hold you accountable and, help you learn and prepare you for whatever it is that you choose to do next. But I think the way in which we do that, it is important to provide feedback. And we do have a mechanism for doing that. Kathy Rootman works really closely with that group. Now, with regards to the pandemic, they're not having their in-person face-to-face meetings. They're doing some virtual work. So I know that's currently limited. So we'll see if in the future they may be able to increase their meetings and get some more done.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dr. Brown. The only thing I would add is, as specific to the pandemic and to planning throughout the late spring, summer for reopening in the fall, there was a district-wide committee, educators within the district, community members, and there were students a part of that. Now, did it turn into, we got a couple of students' perspective and there wasn't a mechanism for them to go survey out? That likely could have happened. So I think there is a really good effort to get student input, but I'm all ears if you want to offer an idea or two, because I think we could be better at that, frankly.
It just seems like from my perspective that it's a very small group of students that is able to give input. Like Krupa reached out to me, otherwise I would not have known that this meeting was happening. And I feel like there's just students aren't aware of ways, at least ones who aren't currently involved with leadership or aren't on boards, that's not really clear how to contact the school board or administrators to give input.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Thank you.
And just for your own knowledge, if you'd like to ever contact me, my email is on the Boone County. So if you go to Boone County Schools and you look up the board, all of our emails are on there, and we try our best. There's been a lot of emails lately. We try our best to respond within 24 to 48 hours. So we always appreciate feedback. And if you have questions, we can hopefully facilitate a link to some resources that we might have, or maybe you have some feedback or a way that we could do something different. But so we're definitely available through email at any point in time.
Absolutely. I'll recommend always emailing Dr. Brown first. I'm joking.
All right, so thank you for your responses to that, and actually took off one of the questions I was going to ask. And for a bit of clarification on this, I was on the SSAC for a few years during my academic career. I just left it this year, so I'm familiar with the organization, and encouraging student voice on the board has been a big part of what we've been trying to do. And the student board rep, for those that are here, is non-voting. And so I just wanted to make that abundantly clear to where they do have a voice, but they do not vote on any policy. And so moving on from that, I want to delve a bit into access and our socioeconomic students. And so many students in Boone County display a wide range of socioeconomic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, technology access, educational ability, you name it. So for those students that are most at risk, and for students that are of racial minority groups, how do you plan to reach out to them and make sure that they're doing the most that they possibly can bring out themselves during this time, especially considering that the COVID pandemic has hit them the hardest?
I'll lead off here again. I feel like I'm hogging the discussion. So the question was, how do I plan to reach out? I mean, just, I guess being candid, I probably won't be reaching out personally, but as a board, I can tell you the heart of our board is with our students that are our EL population, our at-risk students, and our students that don't have a ton of support at home. So we're constantly focused on that equation of equity, right? So you have equality where you give everybody the same thing because you look at them all the same and you want all of them to do well. But we're working really hard at being more equitable in our offerings and in our resources. So that means if a certain group of kids and students need extra help in math, science, language arts, whatever it might be, or a certain school needs extra help, we need to figure out a way as a board to support that financially and from a resource perspective. Some examples of things that have, I guess, come across kind of our radar and our desk is, I think your question was specifically during the pandemic. Mr. Turner and his office are actively working on, how do we get hotspots out into the community? So is it them, kids being able to pull into our parking lot and use the school's hotspot, or is it partnering with a partner like Cincinnati Bell and finding ways to put hotspots out in the community? I say I'm not going to reach out personally. I do things on my kind of my personal side, my personal life, through helping kids with food insecurity and helping provide meals. But I didn't want to, I guess I didn't want to answer from a board perspective that I'm doing something specifically, but I hope and I believe that we're encouraging programs within the district that allow our operations teams or our LSS teams or our principals or our teachers to make those interactions happen.
And I'll point out one of the things that has become very apparent with this pandemic is the school is a part of a larger community, and there are resources and support in that community. For example, I know Matt mentioned hotspots with the school. There was also a grant that was just received by the Boone County Public Library where they can extend their hotspot up to 2 miles from the Boone County Public Library. So things like that, where we can engage our community partners. I know Mr. Fryman today was at Connor High School with parents helping set up barriers for the lunchroom, right? So getting our community involved, looking at our resources outside of just our walls can help hopefully provide some creative solutions outside of just, we're one-to-one district and we have a few hotspots. So I think we have to look at ways that we can support those communities. I know Kathy Reitman has tried to engage a number of our communities, and they are still doing home visits. So if there's a student that is not engaged, there is still a process that we're trying to reach those students and those families to give support where we can.
Yeah, and I know we're short on time, but outside of pandemic outreach for our at-risk and our students that need that boost, we're actively redoing the facility plan. The top 3 projects are 4 populations of our students that need extra technology, extra space in their buildings, that need a boost facilities wise. An example over the last couple of years of something the board has approved and put in place is the English Language Learners Academy. So Dr. Delahunty and team do a fantastic job leading that work. So that's just a couple of quick examples of, I guess, from a broader perspective, what we're doing for our groups that need that extra support. And there's a lot still to do.
Thank you both for speaking to equity on that. And then Dr. Buehler, if you were to be elected to the board, what would equity look like for you, and how would you try to strive for that?
Equity for me is basically that everybody has the same access regardless of whether you're in person or virtual. But the metrics to track that are extremely difficult, as both Dr. Brown and Mr. McIntyre pointed out. People doing home visits or checking on non-engaged students, or to see, just making sure that every student has everything that they need, especially because we do have such a large population of students with English where English isn't their first language. And sometimes that access is really, really hard for all of them. I think that we definitely need the members of the community to help us out with that, or to help identify more of those students that are in need, even if it's fellow students going to an administrator at school and pointing out that maybe one of their friends has complained that they don't have good internet access, or they're struggling because they don't have the devices or the resources. We need the community as a whole to reach out to people so that we would know as board members, perhaps some of these problem areas, get them identified, and then hopefully come up with viable solutions to make them equitable for everyone.
All right, thank you for that. And so with that concludes our hour. Thank you all for this time. We're so appreciative that you were able to make it today. And for anyone that showed up, asked questions, thank you for your time and your questions. And we hope to continue this dialogue some point in the future, hopefully after the election, to where you guys will be on the board. And so if you live in Boone County and you are watching this on Facebook, or you're in the Zoom meeting right now, each member here and each candidate here will be on your ballot coming up. So please vote, and please get registered to vote, and please vote however you can if you are legally able to do so. And with that, we are done today. So if you guys would like to leave.
Krupa, nice job. Thank you. Thanks to the other students asking questions. Nice job, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you
guys.
all. Good job. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.